So the drought situation here is awful. It's Western India, it's Northern India, it's into Nepal, it's Pakistan, it's Bangladesh, it's Indochina, China, that's Thailand, Cambodia, and Vietnam. And now it's gone up to Central Asia and southern China, as I say. These people, as you say, Herb, are suffering severely, and particularly, of course, with their agriculture, which you mentioned they're so dependent and so good at. So the record heat across South Asia is absolutely phenomenal.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Climate Emergency Forum. I'm Herb Simmons. I'm the author of A Climate Vocabulary of the Future, and today we'll be talking about Asia's climate crisis, scorched, drenched, and parched. Basically, I think as we know, we're going to dive into the urgent realities of the changing climate as we do every week, but we're focusing today on Asia, which is a continent at the heart of the climate crisis where extreme weather is reshaping lives and landscapes in ways really unlike anywhere else. The diversity of Asia, as I think we know, is staggering. And even though we're going to focus primarily on South Asia, it's home to close to 5 billion people, 60% of the world's population, almost 50 countries. It spans towering Himalayan peaks, striking coastal megacities like Jakarta and many more, and vast monsoon-fed farm fields that over 2 billion farmers, small farmers, are present and working to provide the food we need in Asia. But this diversity fuels a unique climate challenge. It's a variety of extreme climate events, and they're all, like elsewhere on the planet, hitting harder and faster due to the climate heating. From scorching heat waves in India where temperatures topped 50 degrees centigrade in 2024, to catastrophic floods in Pakistan that displaced 33 million people in 22. 33 million people is greater than the majority of countries in the world have as their populations. Asia faces a relentless onslaught of storms, droughts, and rising seas. The Himalayas, often called the third pole, are losing glaciers at an alarming rate, threatening water security for 2 billion people. And rivers like the Indus and the Mekong are challenged with all this drought and extreme weather. And the monsoon is also beginning to suffer. So when we put all these together, it's really an unprecedented situation there. And we also have, to make matters even worse, all this geopolitical challenges to working together. That India and China are fighting with each other, and India and Pakistan, literally just a few days ago, almost started a major war with each other. China is in conflict with most of the nations in the southern part of the continent, which makes cooperation very, very difficult. So we're obviously not going to solve the problem of Asia's climate crisis today in 30 minutes. But with our guests and our panelists that are always here with us, we're going to get a great start to begin to look at what's happening there, why it's happening there, and what some of the lessons we learn that can apply elsewhere on the planet or so. So thank you for joining me today. And as always, I'm delighted to welcome Peter Carter. Peter is, as you know, the head of the Climate Emergency Institute, retired medical doctor, an expert IPCC reviewer, coming to us from the western part of Canada in BC. Peter, I'm so happy you're here today, and the floor is yours.
Thanks, Evan. That was a very informative introduction. It painted a very good big picture. I'm actually going to start with drought. We all have heard, quite rightly, huge publicity of record heat waves year after year after year. Actually started in 2021. This part of the world is reputed to be the poorest part of the world. That might be outside Africa, but it certainly applies to Indochina, Thailand, and Burma, all those places. Also, the hardest hit region of the world with extreme weather. And I don't think there's any question about that. And Herb's mentioned some of that already. I was rather shocked when I checked the SPEI World Drought Monitor to find that going back 3 years, there have been very large regions in South Africa and in South Asia affected by drought and getting to severe drought. And that actually has expanded when I looked at the past 12 months and even expanded up to southern China. So the drought situation here is awful. It's Western India, it's Northern India, it's into Nepal, it's Pakistan, it's Bangladesh, it's into China, that's Thailand, Cambodia, and Vietnam. And now it's gone up to Central Asia and southern China, as I say. These people, as you say, Herb, are suffering severely, and particularly, of course, with their agriculture, which you mentioned they're so dependent and so good at. So the record heat across South Asia is absolutely phenomenal. It started actually in 2021. You may remember that extreme, extraordinary heat affecting the Indochina Peninsula. And it lasted for at least 5 months. It was absolutely unbelievable. So then we've had record heat waves in this region 2023, 2022. World Weather Attribution has confirmed the attribution. Actually, in 2022, they found that the heat waves were made 30 times more likely by global climate change. And then we got up to April of 2024 last year. Well, last year, of course, was a record year for global temperature increase. That wasn't expected, but it was. We had records in India, as you mentioned, Herb, up to 50 degrees C. The World Weather Attribution found that these trends in these heat waves are 45 times more likely due to climate change, which means due to our greenhouse gas emissions, and 0.85 degrees C hotter. So that's huge. So that brings us up to this year, last April. And really, that's the worst of all because the entire region of southern Asia was impacted, affected by the most extreme heat, particularly India and particularly Pakistan. The media reported that we had reached this year in these regions the limits of survivability. The global warming that we're at today, we've seen nothing yet because we now know, unfortunately, that emissions are not going to go down. They're just not. And that is the political situation, I guess you'd call it. A climate shift index with Climate Central, they have done a attribution already, and it's very high. Big increases of the heat waves in Southern Asia. So why? Well, there are many reasons, right? Global emissions are record high and they're going to go up higher. Atmospheric greenhouse gas concentrations are record high, and they're almost at the worst case scenario. Global temperature record high. 24, 25, they were at the worst case scenario. But then the other killer, of course, is the reduction in aerosol cooling, which particularly affects this region because China, for about 10 years, has been reducing its air pollution. And so that means less aerosol cooling, and that means more heating for this region. So, an awful situation.
I always take a deep breath after I listen to you, Peter, because you are so articulate in summing up the so many of the dimensions of the crisis and how mostly and maybe all are moving in the same direction, which is the wrong direction. And we'll talk more about that. I just want to comment that we're sort of starting a little mini theme of Asia here with this program. And soon we'll also have a program that focuses primarily on India, what the challenges are, as Peter began to articulate, and also what some of the solutions might look like, where we're having the executive director of the Healthy Climate Initiative at a future meeting. So stay tuned for that. Thank you so much, Peter. And let me turn, as always, to our regular Paul Beckwith. Hello, Paul. You are, as we know, a climate system scientist from Ottawa, Canada. You host your own YouTube channel, producing hundreds, if not over 1,000 videos on every conceivable climate subject. And we're happy to have you here. And as always, the floor is yours, Paul.
Thank you, Herb, and prepare yourself to take an even deeper breath or perhaps even hyperventilate after my session. So, first of all, the people in Southeast Asia, India is 1.45 billion, Pakistan's 0.25, Bangladesh 0.17 billion. Add them all up, we're talking about 2.1 billion people. This is in South Asia. If you include Southeast Asia, countries like Indonesia and Philippines, you need to add another zero point 0.7 billion. So South Asia is about a quarter of the global population, including Southeast Asia, it's about a third. In interesting statistics, the median age of people in that region is 27.5 years old, which is extremely young. It's only younger than that in Africa, which is under 25 years. Just to put that in context, North America's 35 to 39. Europe's the oldest continent, 42 to 44 and a half, something like that, average or median age. So, India and Pakistan, of course, are the dominant countries by population. And it's clear that climate change is a central escalating driver of conflict between India and Pakistan. We can talk about it as water weaponization. So, water security and stress is the biggest factor contributing to stress in that region. Both countries, India and Pakistan, rely on rivers fed by Himalayan glaciers, which are melting faster due to warming that exceeds the global average. So, the shift of precipitation in the Himalayas is shifting from snowfall to rainfall, 25% drop in snowfall recently. So that shifts the water, the timing, and the volume of river flows going through those countries. Now, those countries have a long-standing treaty called the Waters Treaty from it was a 1960 agreement, and that's under strain. In fact, water's become a strategic asset rather than a shared resource. So India recently suspended the treaty. This greatly amplifies the risk of wars. We had a recent skirmish for less than a week. Fortunately, that's calmed down a bit, but the problem of water scarcity in that region is not going away. So water is being weaponized in these political disputes. Upstream dams holding back more water in the Indus River from the Himalayas. More water is being diverted out. For example, diversions for groundwater replenishment are not really counted in the treaty. So, and then there's environmental degradation on the banks of the river, which change water flows as well because there's less infiltration into the soils and grounds. So the risks are large in that region. Water scarcity, drought, weather patterns, extreme weather events are increasing that risk. And it's not just a local risk. So of course, because both powers, India and Pakistan, have an estimated several hundred nuclear weapons. If those went off in that region, that would trigger a global nuclear winter in all likelihood, according to the models. A global nuclear winter would cause widespread crop failures and food strife and could lead the fighting to spread outside of that region. So it's a it's a bit of a powder keg region in order to have stability and peace there, especially between India and Pakistan. People are going to need that water. I mean, we're talking about water supplies being at risk for over 2 billion, 3 billion people even. So that's one of the major factors that's occurring. Also, with a median age of people 27.5 years, so young, sociologists and people studying populations say that those sort of young ages for populations, if they're not happy with their lot in life, if it's too hot for them to have a livelihood and farm, that those ages can become a powder keg, and a big risk increase factor that greatly increases risks of wars because those people will lash out against governments, etc. We all know how we feel when it's like 45 Celsius, near 100% humidity or 90% humidity, it really puts people on edge and makes them, it affects the human body, the human psyche. So it makes the risk greater.
Well, you were right. I'm now having to take a double deep breath, Paul. You've, as you always do, masterfully intertwine and weave together a number of issues we don't always connect to the climate crisis, the security concerns between nations, wars, the result, as you said, of intergovernmental relationships, international relationships, like on the Indus River collapsing or being suspended, just at the time that they need to be strengthened. And of course, we're seeing that here in my country, in the United States as well. You also mentioned the important point about some of the gaps and losses in, for example, water and aquifers and so forth isn't even counted. And it always reminds and shocks me that we don't really have like an international, basically, inventory of natural capital. Every company has a balance sheet, but if you looked at the balance sheet of the earth, it would be pretty grim. It's getting more imbalanced every day, and the imbalance, of course, begins to accelerate as the countervailing forces get weaker and weaker. And lastly, your comment about the average age there being 27 and a half. Well, that's just slightly less than the average age of the three of us, so I don't feel too bad about that. But with that, let me turn it back to Peter Carter.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning the enormity of the population of this region, Paul. Yeah. And the Himalayas, we've been aware of this, 2 billion people like years ago with the Himalayas melting. When I look at the Himalayas on the climate reanalyzer now, that they're way above freezing, 10 degrees C. So yeah, they've got to be melting fast. I mentioned drought. So the SPEI Drought Monitor is actually worse than it has been over the past 3 years and 1 year. It switched somewhat in India. It's now affecting most of India, Western India more severely. Pakistan, huge, severe. Also Afghanistan, also Bangladesh still. Still in Indochina, a little bit less, but they still have drought. And drought in southern China and drought up to northern China. So that situation is just getting worse. And of course, it's not unlikely because we're at these record global temperature increases accelerating out of sight. With regards to the global warming today, northern India, southern India still has it, Indochina still has it, so they're suffering with heat still. Now China has a significant amount of warming. Central Asia, of course, you may have heard about unprecedented warming, heat waves in Central Asia, nothing like it before, and a vast region. So we still have Bangladesh in excess warming and Pakistan really bad, and also going up to Afghanistan. So it's hardly surprising that things are getting worse everywhere. I just want to mention in closing, I have really resisted the idea that we couldn't get our global emissions down because the IPCC said they had to come down by 2025. There's no way. They're not going to come down for years and years and years. China's building more coal plants. It's back to how many coal plants it was building 4 years ago. India, of course, is building more, mining more. And of course, we now have the Trump administration pushing even more record gas production in the US, record oil production in the US, going to be even higher. And of course, Trump digs coal, damn him. So my last mention was I looked into the coal situation and can Trump do that? Oh my God, the largest coal mine in the world is in the United States. It's in Wyoming, Gillette, Wyoming. That's the largest coal mine in the world. So there's lots of coal mines that you can reopen and increase the ones that are producing.
Thanks, Peter. Yes, coal, of course, is used on a massive scale in China, as is everything on a massive scale. I think we're all familiar with statistics. I may not have these exactly right, that sort of China used more concrete in the last decade or two than the rest of the world did in 100 years together, and all that generates emissions. And even though China is making major efforts at transitioning to green energy. They have whatever the thinking is behind the scenes. There is also, as you're saying, Peter, continued emphasis on coal and other dirty energy to power their economy for better or for worse. You've also pointed out, all of you there, the extremes of weather, and we've talked about this term before, particularly Paul, about whiplash weather, and that's evident in China as well. And we've even come up with new terms for some of this stuff that combines disparate phenomena that were never thought about being combined, like the concept of a flash drought, an atmospheric river, and many, many more. And these are all applicable to China. One more phenomena that is not as true or as evident here in North America is what I've called in my book dust debacles, that these dust storms, as a result of the drought and the extreme weather and the parched conditions in parts of Central Asia as well as Africa and elsewhere, can last for days and weeks, where you can barely see, you can barely breathe. And these are happening usually in parts of the world that have the greatest amount of poverty, that have the fewest resources to protect people against the ravages. So it's this unholy combination of severe weather, political impotence, and lack of resources, and focus on other things like wars and so forth, that make it so difficult to have the energy transition that's absolutely necessary. And as Peter points out, we're so far behind on that it's questionable whether and how we're ever going to be able to catch up. With that, let me bring it back to Paul for any additional and last comments.
Yes, thank you. So I've already mentioned that snowfall has decreased 25% in the last several decades in the Himalayas, and now it's rainfall instead. The glaciers, it's so warm there, and Peter's mentioned how warm that since 2011, if you look at the melt rates of the glacier, the Himalayas in general, from 2011 to 2020, that decade, the melting is 65% faster than the previous decade to that. So that's 2001 to 2010. So it's a huge acceleration in the melting of that glacier. 60% of the flow rate of the massive Indus River, which feeds the water to Pakistan and India, is 60% of the summer flow is glacial meltwater. The total flow is something like 600 gigatons of glacier melt releasing water. And, those sort of huge numbers make you think of mass ice loss from Greenland, 300 gigatons, ice loss from Antarctica, 300 or 400 gigatons. We're talking about 600 gigatons from the Himalayas. So calling it the third pole, after the other two poles, the true poles, is a very good way of describing the Himalayas. So all of these changes are occurring very, very quickly. It really leads you to the question of, what's going to happen, say, in the near to mid to longer term future when the glaciers are greatly reduced in the Himalayas and can no longer be relied on. So what can we do? I mean, these countries need to start really looking at desalination. I mean, they're on coastlines, right? They need to start really working and investing in finding ways to get more water from other sources other than the Indus. And if you want to look on the global scale for a little bit, we've talked in previous videos about the potential of the AMOC failing. For example, the AMOC is greatly slowing down, and what that means is less heat goes from the tropics to the high latitude regions. So the tropics start warming at a greatly accelerated rate. We often talk about amplification of temperature warming at the poles, but the tropics are the warming there is starting to accelerate, and the rainfall patterns are changing. The ITCZ, Intertropical Convergence Zone, is shifting, so the patterns of rainfall are changing. And all of these things directly affect those billions of people that live in South Asia and Southeast Asia.
That's yeah. All these things are coming together as both you and Peter have pointed out, and they're reinforcing each other. And the kinds of statistics you're pointing out, 60% more of this, 75% more of that. These are not 2% increases or 0.5% increases. I mean, these are increases that are beyond the capacity of governments to respond to, of individuals often to respond to, and of natural systems, perhaps most importantly, to respond to without changing their state into a new state. And a new state is almost never going to be good news because we've evolved in a kind of Goldilocks Holocene state where things weren't too hot and they weren't too cold, they weren't too dry and they weren't too wet. And, we've thrived as a human species. And when you get used to thriving, at least some of us in the global north and elsewhere, it's very difficult to sort of change positions there. One of the insidious aspects of the accelerated melt of the glaciers is that in the short term, which may be 10, 20, 30 years or so, there's more water that's available as that glacier melt comes down and fills up the rivers. And so people then have every reason to be complacent. Well, what are we worrying about with a water shortage? We've never had a wider river. And of course, we're just basically taking our natural capital and eating our natural capital and guaranteeing that the future generations will say to us, "What the hell did you do? Where did that water go and why didn't you do anything? Damn it." And I don't have the answer to that question, but that's one of the questions we talk about here, very, very frequently. And the last thing I'll say is that as I was listening to the two of you, I thought about the one time I was in India, which was many, many years, if not decades ago. And my background is urban planning, and I came across in an Indian a bookstore with English language books, a volume this thick that was the Indian national plan for the next 10 years or so. And I was probably the only person in history who backpacked into India and bought this 6-pound document and put it in my backpack, rather than more food because I was so impressed that they actually had a national plan. And all I can say is I will plead guilty that I don't follow whether they are doing that kind of national planning now or not, but I sure hope they are. Though hopefully, they don't need to produce 6-pound documents. It can be online. So with that, let me thank, as always, I think one of our more stimulating, even though every program we do, of course, is very stimulating, where we're beginning to turn our attention to the area that does have 60% of the world's population, some of the most unique physical features, challenges, and that basically, I think it's fair to say that as Asia goes, so the world will go. We hope to spend more time focused on India. We thank you for coming here today. If you like this program, we'd appreciate it if you would like it to subscribe to our channel, to go to our website, theclimateemergencyforum.org. And if you're so inclined, and we hope you will be, to donate so that we can continue to put what is now well over 200 programs online that are seen by people all over the world. And please leave us your comments. Tell us what you think. Tell us what you'd like to talk about. Tell us what you're feeling about what's happening to the climate emergency and how it's affecting you and your life. And with that, as I mentioned, we'll have a future program very shortly that will zero in on India in particular. But for now, I want to say on behalf of Peter and Paul, thank you for participating, and we'll see you next week. Thanks so much.